Hello, my name is Mary. Welcome. Is this your first time seeing me? No need to answer. I can guess myself. I'm a detective after all. I see a surprised look on your face, although I don't think that you're seeing me for the first time. Otherwise, you would have been studying my appearance, but your eyes are locked right above my eyes. Oh, you're just surprised I have short hair now? Well, yeah, I did cut it. So, I love detectives. I'm a detective girl, and I have been showing increased interest in detective novels by Agatha Christie, one of which I will try to solve myself. Basically, I will read a book, a detective novel, and I'm gonna write down here all of the clues and hints, and then I will make a suggestion about who I think the murderer is, and then I will read the book till the end and find out if I was correct or not. The book that I chose is Mysterious Affair at Styles by Agatha Christie, and I would like to introduce you to the characters. The narrator is Mr. Hastings, who is also a friend of Hercule Poirot, who is the main detective of the story. Now, Styles is a name of the place where the events happen. The house owner is an old lady about 70 years old, whose name is Emily Inglethorpe. All right. Emily Inglethorpe has two sons, but they're not actually her sons, because she's been married before to a guy whose last name is Cavendish. So her first son is John Cavendish, who's about 45 years old, but she also has a younger son who's about 40 years old. His name is Lawrence Cavendish. First thing they tell you about Lawrence is that he had bad health since childhood, but honestly, Lawrence is kind of a crush, because he's not the strongest, health-wise, but he's a little sad, he's a little emo, and also it's been mentioned that he's spending a lot of money on publishing his poetry. So, John Cavendish has a wife, Mary Cavendish. Now let's talk about Mr. Inglethorpe himself. No one really likes him, besides Mrs. Inglethorpe. He's 20 years younger than Mrs. Inglethorpe, approximately, and everyone in the house seems to think that he's just married for the money, and he's just waiting for the day that Mrs. Inglethorpe kicks the bucket. And he has a very big black beard and glasses. Next, there's a woman called Avie Howard, who is, kind of a servant of the house, but also they say that they're like friends with Mrs. Inglethorpe. She's described as a very strong and big woman, and her manner of talking is also a little bit harsh. The last big character that's been introduced so far is Cynthia Murdoch, and she's a protege to Mrs. Inglethorpe. I never really understood that word. I know that that means that she's protected by her, but what does that mean? Okay, whatever. Cynthia is a nurse. As far as I understood, Mrs. Inglethorpe is gonna be the victim of this murder mystery. And you know what? I'm gonna say it right away. No one likes Mr. Inglethorpe, and there's been some talk about how he just waits for Mrs. Inglethorpe to die so that he can take all her money. So I can just tell right now that he's not gonna be the one to murder her. I also noticed that there's been a lot of talk about different kinds of poisons. So far, I've seen Cynthia talk about poisons, but that makes sense because she's a nurse. And then Mary was also talking to Hastings, and she's saying that a lot of murders in particular are made with little help of poison. So Mrs. Inglethorpe is dead. But first, some things that happened before that I would want to discuss. The day before Mrs. Inglethorpe died, she had a fight with Avie, and Avie left. Before that, she warned Hastings to look after Mrs. Inglethorpe because everyone in this house is after her money. Next, that day, Mr. and Mrs. Inglethorpe had a big fight. Also, Mary Cavendish talked to Emily Inglethorpe, and they also kind of had a fight because Mary said, "Why wouldn't you show it to me?" And Emily said, "Because it has nothing to do with you." Now, I would also want to introduce you to two more characters. First is Dr. Bauerstein. He's friends with Mary. I feel like he's kind of sketchy. And also Dorcas, who is a maid, and she overheard a fight that Mr. and Mrs. Inglethorpe had. Mrs. Inglethorpe died a very bad death, and it seemed like someone did poison her. Right before she died, Dr. Bauerstein came into the room and she cried, "Alfred, Alfred," and then died. Now, Alfred is, of course, Mr. Inglethorpe. Now that, I feel like, is a very interesting clue. Mrs. Inglethorpe ate and drank so much that evening. I feel like she just died from food poisoning. She had dinner. She also asked to bring her coffee to her room, and then I think in her room they found a cup of cocoa, and this cocoa has been sitting at the table for half an hour before it got to her, and at the tray with the cocoa, and there's been a little bit of salt. Hercule Poirot doesn't think it was salt. Okay, also after she died, after Hercule Poirot arrived, they started searching her room for pieces of evidence, and they found some things. First, a little splash of candle, but it wasn't from anyone who was in her room during her last breaths, because the only person who was with candle was Lawrence, and his candle was pink, and this splash of candle is white. There is also a broken cup, and what's weird is that there's also a broken lamp next to it, but the lamp is broken and that's fine, but the cup is broken in such a way that you can tell that someone stepped on it. Okay, there's also a little piece of paper that was found in the fireplace, and on this piece of paper is written something like LL End, and it seems to be her dying will, but either she or someone else wanted to burn it. Now, here's my suggestion. You know how this says LL End? I feel like it could also say IE End. Depends on your writing. Now, whose name ends with IE? It's Avie. Now, I don't know if I'm correct on this one, because I think in your dying will, you would write a person's full name, and I think that Avie's full name is just Avie. And also, I honestly don't think that she would give Avie something in her dying will, but still, it's my suggestion, okay? Another piece of evidence is a piece of green cloth. So, as I said, I definitely don't think that Alfred killed her, but I think that he still had to do something with her murder. Maybe he asked someone else to do it, or maybe he just helped someone to do it, but he didn't actually poison her. Before her death, Emily said Alfred, Alfred, but she didn't see Alfred because Alfred wasn't at home during her death. She saw Dr. Bauerstein. Hercule Poirot said that Alfred Inglethorpe has a very distinctive look with his glasses and his beard. I feel like it has something to do with the fact that Dr. Bauerstein and Alfred Inglethorpe look a little bit like each other because they have big beards. And honestly, that's pretty much it. So right now, my main suspect is Dr. Bauerstein. People around the house seem to think that Emily was poisoned by something in her coffee. There was a lot of talk about coffee because Mary told Cynthia, can you bring the coffee to Emily? I will make it, but you, Cynthia, can you give it to Emily? There was also another dying will that Mrs. Inglethorpe made just the day before she died, and before that she had another will where she left everything to Mr. Inglethorpe. I think something's wrong with Mary Cavendish, John's wife, because she's acting weird. She had a fight with Mrs. Inglethorpe, and then during this whole day, her tone of talking was just kind of harsh and weird and unnatural for her. And she seems to spend quite a lot of time with Dr. Bauerstein. Also, why I suspect Dr. Bauerstein? Because, now listen closely, I really tried to like pull something together with this theory. Now, we see that a cup has been smashed. It didn't just fall, someone stepped on it. Now, if you've stepped on a cup and it's been broken like that, then you were probably wearing boots, right? Another thing, Hercule Poirot said to Hastings, we need to pay close attention to the weather. That's been the day that Mrs. Inglethorpe died. And he's saying, like, the weather was very hot. It's been 30 degrees before Mrs. Inglethorpe died. Dr. Bauerstein came into house. His clothes were all dirty. He said that he fell or something. So I feel like he was in some weird place. Maybe he was, getting the poison or something. And he went into the room and he was wearing boots because he just got from the street. Also, I tried to think what would be his motivation to kill her, and I think that they're more just friends with Mary because she's acting all weird. Maybe she helped Dr. Bauerstein kill Emily Inglethorpe. Maybe she's after her money. But then my theory kind of crashes by the fact that Mary is a wife to John Cavendish, and John is the first son of Mrs. Inglethorpe, and by her last will, all of her belongings are left to John Cavendish. So I feel like if John has the money, Mary can also like have a little. So I don't know. But again, the fact that Emily saw Dr. Bauerstein and said Alfred, I feel like she mistook him for Alfred, because she was a little bit out of her mind while she was dying. I'll give her that. So I will, I even have a red string, and now that I did that, another theory of mine is I think that Avie might be okay, maybe I'm really pushing it too far right now, but I just want to say it in case then I will be correct. I feel like Avie also might be the one who killed her, because as I said, I think that in this will, maybe Mrs. Inglethorpe has written Avie and blah blah blah, and then they had a big fight, and then she burned this will, and now Avie left the home, but then she appeared once she heard the news. As they say, she appeared to be the only person who cried over the death of Mrs. Inglethorpe. So I feel like, maybe it's a little bit of a reverse psychology. Maybe she just wants to appear the one who cried the most when she's actually the one who killed her. And also another thing is that she has some sort of folder with important documents that's locked by a key, and while they were in the house with Hercule Poirot, he took the key to this folder, but then he came out of the room, he was doing his things, they came back in the room, and this thing was already opened. Even though Hercule Poirot, who was the owner of the key to this folder, he didn't open it, he locked it before going out, so someone opened it and took something from it, but Hercule doesn't know what they took. I've been fooled. I should have guessed that my theories were too on the nose to be real. They had an interrogation for everyone, and during this interrogation they asked Mr. Inglethorpe why does he think that when Mrs. Inglethorpe saw Dr. Bauerstein, she said Alfred. And Mr. Inglethorpe said that in the dim lighting, she probably just saw the figure of Dr. Bauerstein and thought that it's Alfred Inglethorpe. Hercule Poirot said, well, it's an interesting theory, yeah, but it's not true. So that's out the window. Another theory that I had with Avi, that was also like, I was foolish to think that it would be that easy, because Hastings had a talk with Hercule Poirot where they were talking about how Avi hates Mr. Inglethorpe so much that it's almost artificial. But Hercule Poirot once again said that it's definitely not her who killed Mrs. Inglethorpe. Also, during this interrogation, it's been said that Mrs. Inglethorpe died because of poisoning from a poison called strychnine. And the taste of this poison is very bitter, so if it was in her cocoa, she would have definitely guessed that there's something wrong with it, but coffee is bitter itself. So if you put strychnine in coffee, she wouldn't really notice that something's off. A lot of weird stuff was said during this investigation. For example, Lawrence, who's her second son, they reminded us that he's actually a doctor. He has a degree, but he said, I want to propose a theory that maybe my mom died a natural death because she's been taking a medicine that has a tiny little dose of strychnine, and maybe just because she's been taking this medicine for such a long time, the just a little accumulation effect worked and she died because of it. And this theory is such a codswallop that it's very weird and concerning. Why would he propose such a weird theory? Because he's a doctor, and obviously she didn't die because of medicine. Why would he say that? But that's very concerning because it makes things harder for me. Mary Cavendish was being, again, super sus. She's been asked, Mary, you've been at home during Mr. and Mrs. Inglethorpe had a fight. Did you hear it? She said, no, yeah, I did hear the fight. Mary, so did you or did you not hear the fight? I mean, I heard loud voices. I don't have a habit of eavesdropping, so I don't know if they've been fighting or something. I've heard loud voices, okay? Okay, Mary, why are you being so sus? And also, it's not looking good for your dear friend Dr. Bauerstein. He said that I've taken a little drop of the cocoa Mrs. Inglethorpe has been drinking, and I've made an analysis, and there's definitely no strychnine in the cocoa. And then after that, Hercule Poirot told Hastings that he wants to also make a little analysis of this cocoa, and Hastings was like, wait, Dr. Bauerstein already took care of that. And Hercule said, I know Dr. Bauerstein took care of that. One of my main suspects still will be Dr. Bauerstein. Even if he didn't kill Miss Inglethorpe, he still did something. Maybe... No. Never mind. Did I blink? Or did my camera go black for a second? Okay. Hastings also told Hercule Poirot that John Cavendish and A.V. Howard were probably the only two people who were being real during that interrogation. And Hercule said, well, yeah, one of them was definitely being truthful. And Hastings said, what are you talking about? A.V. was truthful. And you know what, Agatha? You think I don't understand the games you're trying to play? He's emphasizing the fact that Hercule Poirot probably thought that A.V. wasn't really being that truthful, when he actually meant that John wasn't being that truthful. But then I went to reread what did John say. He didn't really say that much. He just said that I was woken up during that night, then I went to see her, and then he just described the stuff that happened that night. So what could he be untruthful about? The fact that he wasn't woken up and he woke up by himself and maybe he killed Mrs. Inglethorpe? I don't know. the most interesting thing. A guy that's selling medicine said that Alfred Inglethorpe bought strychnine the day before Mr. and Mrs. Inglethorpe had a fight. But then, when they asked Alfred Inglethorpe about it, he said that he didn't buy strychnine, nor did he have a fight with Mrs. Inglethorpe. And then I went to reread all the mentionings of this fight that Mr. and Mrs. Inglethorpe had. And here's what I found. Someone, I don't remember who, it doesn't matter, heard Mrs. Inglethorpe saying, "I gave you all I had. How could you do this to me after so many years of me taking care of you?" So blah blah blah. And then also when Dorcas, the maid that overheard this fight, was asked about the fight, she said that Mrs. Inglethorpe was shouting and yelling, and then she didn't really hear what Mr. Inglethorpe said. And she's been asked, "Are you sure it's been his voice?" And she said, "Well, yeah, who else could it be?" Good question. So it was someone that lived with her. Maybe it was either of her two sons, because they've been living with her. She took care of them. Now, I don't want it to be Lawrence, mainly because I just like him. I will take a guess and say it was John. His motive for killing Mrs. Inglethorpe would just be to get money faster. In her will, she left all her money to John. And I don't know, it feels like such a cliche, killing someone just to get their money. And then about buying strychnine, so it wasn't Alfred Inglethorpe, but as Hercule Poirot said, his look is very easily stolen because he wears glasses and he wears a beard. And if you wear a beard and glasses, most of your face is covered, and honestly, if you're Alfred or not, you're gonna look like him. So I don't want to say that it was Dr. Bauerstein. That would be, again, too obvious. So someone definitely disguised themselves as Alfred. But, like, where did they get a beard? Could it be someone without a beard? Just go in there with, like, a fake beard? I'm not sure what was the, I don't know, wig production during the times when these events were happening. The fact that someone disguised themselves as Alfred, bought strychnine, means that someone very much wants to drive attention from themselves and make people think it was Alfred. But when asked where was Alfred, if he didn't buy strychnine, where was he at the time, he wouldn't say. So what was it that was so scary to say that he wouldn't even say it, even though it gave him an alibi? So maybe it was to do something with Mrs. Inglethorpe's money. Maybe he was wasting them so foolishly that he wouldn't want to say it. Maybe he was like gambling or something. I was correct about the fact that someone could wear a beard to make themselves look like Alfred Inglethorpe. I think that the person who tried to look like Alfred is not the same person who killed Mrs. Inglethorpe. I feel like there's more than one person involved in this whole plot. So here are my suggestions about who it could be disguising themselves. Now, it would be too obvious to think that it would be John or Lawrence. So I'm gonna try to be more out of the box with this one. I think that it could be A.V. Howard. My explanation for this one is that when we first meet A.V. and when she's first described in the book, she's described as I said, a big, harsh, manly woman. If she's described like this, I feel like maybe she could make herself look and even sound probably like Mr. Inglethorpe. But as I said, I don't think that A.V. is the one who killed Mrs. Inglethorpe. Hercule Poirot also said that she's definitely not the one who did it. So maybe she worked with someone. Another thing, if Mr. Inglethorpe didn't buy strychnine, then where was he? He didn't say it. Hercule Poirot said that he was just hanging out with farmer's wife. That's it? I gotta say, I'm a little underwhelmed. I thought there would be something more shocking than that. Otherwise, why wouldn't he say it? Like, Mrs. Inglethorpe is already dead. You can give yourself an alibi, but you wouldn't say that you were just hanging out with some farmer's wife. Oh, another thing. Dr. Bauerstein was arrested for spying. Again, I'm underwhelmed. I felt like he's such an evil man and he did something to kill Mrs. Inglethorpe. It turns out he's just a spy. That's not that interesting. Since Mr. Inglethorpe said that he didn't have a fight with Emily Inglethorpe, then who else could it be? I reread that part of the fight, and Mrs. Inglethorpe said that she doesn't care if there's gonna be some sort of family drama after that fight. And then also when Dorcas entered her room, she told Dorcas to never trust men. So I feel like it was some men that she's been fighting with. The only two men that it could be are John and Lawrence Cavendish. Here's what I think. In her last will, Miss Inglethorpe left everything, and I mean everything, to John Cavendish. She didn't leave anything for Lawrence, even though that's her second son. So maybe they had some sort of a fight with John, and Mrs. Inglethorpe made a new will, right? This one that we saw in the fireplace. She made a new will where she left, well, maybe not everything, maybe she split all her belongings between John and Lawrence, or maybe she didn't give John anything at all. And so I think that maybe it was John who killed her, and he burned this will so that it leaves us with the will that she wrote where she left everything to John. And John burned that will and killed her so that she doesn't have an opportunity to make a different will. Then also thinking about what other people said about that fight. First of all, Dorcas said that it probably was Mr. Inglethorpe because who else could it be? And then Mary was being very weird about it. She wouldn't say what she heard. She just said that she heard someone fighting, right? Since Mary is John's wife, maybe she's been trying to make John seem innocent, and that's why she wouldn't say that it was actually John who was fighting with Mrs. Inglethorpe. So now I'm gonna read the last two chapters, find out if I was correct or not with my final conclusions. I'm gonna get right back to you. The killer is Alfred Inglethorpe. Great job. Yeah, roll back to what I said 2 minutes into this video. I can just tell right now that he's not gonna be the one to murder her. In your face, Mary from the past. So that's great. How all of my theories crashed diabolically. Well, actually, that's not true. I was correct in a couple of things. First of all, it indeed was a fight between John and Mrs. Inglethorpe, but John didn't kill her. And also, it was Avie Howard who disguised herself as Mr. Inglethorpe to buy strychnine. The thing is, Avie and Mr. Inglethorpe worked together. They had some sort of romance going on. And as I said, it wasn't one person who killed her. Someone helped, right? So Avie did help. And they did all that masquerade to make John look like he killed Mrs. Inglethorpe. Because they signed... Because when buying strychnine, they signed in John's hand. Oh my god, can I say 2 words? Because when buying strychnine, they signed with John's handwriting. Oh my god. Because when buying strychnine, they signed with John's handwriting. Oh my god. Let's go through all of my downfalls. The person who crashed this cup of coffee was Lawrence, because he thought that it was Cynthia who poisoned Mrs. Inglethorpe, and so that people can't take this cup for testing on strychnine, he decided to crash it so that it's impossible to even make any test on this cup. I forgot to mention that he did it because he's in love with Cynthia, and he wanted Cynthia to look innocent, even if it was her who poisoned Mrs. Inglethorpe. The thing is, Mrs. Inglethorpe didn't die from coffee because she didn't drink it. Instead, she died from her medicine. So Lawrence was a little bit correct, but it wasn't because she took like too much of her medicine. It was because A.V. Howard did some sort of chemical reaction that made her drink the medicine, that made her die from poisoning. I'm sorry, I hate chemistry, and I didn't really pay close attention on chemistry classes, so I'm not going to be able to tell you what kind of chemical reaction it was. All I know is that she died from her medicine, okay? When Hercule Poirot said that we need to pay close attention to the weather, he meant that it was very hot that day, and despite that, Mrs. Inglethorpe asked Dorcas to lit up her fireplace. She did that to burn her will, because she found out that Mr. Inglethorpe wanted to kill her, and in this will she left everything to Mr. Inglethorpe, and so she burned it so that he gets nothing. She found out about the fact that Mr. Inglethorpe wants to kill her because he wrote a letter to A.V. where he described his intentions, but she didn't understand that her medicine would kill her. So she was just thinking that she needs to be aware of the fact that she might get killed by Alfred. And it was in fact Alfred who opened Emily's folder with important documents, because she put that letter that he wrote to A.V. in her folder, and he wanted to get it back so that no one finds it and no one finds out that it was him. My favorite part was when Hastings asked Hercule Poirot why did Emily yell Alfred, Alfred, and Hercule said that it was because before she died she wanted to let people know who was the murderer. Now that was that was a nice, very satisfying moment. Sorry, Agatha, that I yelled at you before. Still, I'm very mad at the fact that I didn't guess who was the murderer. You know, that was so misleading, because I thought that I would, outsmart everyone. And I've read a couple of Agatha Christie's works, and I know that very often there's a certain person and all the clues suggest that it was him who's the murderer, but that's just made to make the public think that that was the person who committed the crime, so that then you get shocked when you actually find out that it was someone else. I thought it would be the same trick here. Turns out you just never know when reading detectives. So I enjoyed the process. It was interesting trying to be a detective. Let me know if you've enjoyed this video and if I should make a second one like this. Maybe I'll have better luck next time. Maybe I'll take someone else's detective if I make a part 2. But for now, you can subscribe to my channel if you like this video. You can follow me on Instagram where I post my drawings. You can follow me on Goodreads to see what I'm reading right now. And I hope we see each other next time. Goodbye.